Hey everyone, this is Randall and welcome to the Imperial Minis channel. In this video we'll be continuing our coverage of the whimsical fantasy skirmish game Moonstone from Goblin King Games. This video is the next installment in our series of unit and troop box reviews. This video will cover the 2 Treefolk boxes that have been released for the game so far as of the production of this video. These boxes, called the Wyrdwood and Gump, contain a total of 4 models, 3 of whom are Treefolk, with the 4th being the trickster spirit god Dranyer. As with our previous videos in this series, I'll go through each model's unit card in depth and then explain some of the fun and interesting interactions that these units' abilities can have on the table. I'll close the video with some sample troop builds that you can put together using the models from these boxes, and then give my overall impressions of the boxes. Before we get started, I'll just say that these 2 boxes are what motivated me to expand my Moonstone collection into the Ruwt faction. The Ruwts are kind of the foresty, animal, spirit, crazy nature cultist faction. And I found these models and their abilities so intriguing and unique that I just couldn't resist the call of the wild any longer. Lore-wise, these Treefolk are not what you might expect if you were to think of their equivalents from other IPs, such as Ents from Lord of the Rings. These are not actually walking, living trees. Instead, these are trees that have been inhabited by nature spirits who have animated the trees and are making them move and do their bidding. The best way I've heard it described is that the nature spirits are kind of like hermit crabs and that the trees are their shells. Now apparently these spirits are neither male nor female, but throughout this video you'll usually hear me referring to them offhandedly as he, which is just based on my own reflexive interpretation of their appearance. Now the first model we'll look at is Ruwt, who is both the smallest of the Treefolk and one of the most significant, since some of Ruwt's abilities are really foundational to allowing the other 2 Treefolk to excel. First, we'll take a look at Ruwt's keywords and stats. Ruwt has the Treefolk and Spirit keywords. This is the first use of the Treefolk keyword in the game, and Ruwt will share that keyword with a couple of other characters we'll discuss in this video. I'm hoping there will be additional Treefolk models in the game at some point, since I think it'd really be cool to have an entire Treefolk troop. The Spirit keyword is fairly common in Ruwt and allows for some pretty cool synergies with other models such as the Witches and Callista. Ruwt's base stats are really nothing to write home about. His melee stat of 2 is among the lowest in the game. He's definitely not meant to be a bruiser at all, and with only a 1-inch melee range, he can't stretch out very far and smack opponents. He has a respectable arcane stat of 4, so he'll have a decent hand of cards to use when casting his 1 arcane ability. His evade stat is 0, and while he is a small model, he is still a tree, so we can't really expect him to have the -1 or -2 evade stat of more nimble models. He has a total of 7 health and 3 energy, although as we'll see later, he has a way of effectively having more than 3 energy. Now let's turn to Ruwt's passive abilities. First he has Wood Spirit. This is an ability designed to buff Ruwt himself and all of his nearby Treefolk. Well, nearby is a little bit of an understatement, but this lets friendly Treefolk disregard wooded patches and each other for the purposes of determining cover. So you could have one Treefolk model inside of a wooded patch or even blocked by other Treefolk, and then still able to cast their arcane abilities without suffering any cover penalties. There are only 2 Treefolk in this set of 2 boxes who could have arcane abilities to cast on the other models, but there is another model in the Wyrdwood box who could become a Treefolk if the mood strikes her. The Wood Spirit ability has a massive 12-inch range, so if Ruwt is somewhere near the center of your troop or near the center of your table, he can cover a 2-foot diameter, which on a 3-foot by 3-foot table is a ton of real estate. Ruwt's next passive ability is We Are Ruwt. The name is a tongue-in-cheek nod to Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy. This ability is absolutely character-defining and is the most unique ability that Ruwt has. As we'll see in a moment, Ruwt can create wooded patches on the battlefield, and with his We Are Ruwt ability, Ruwt can effectively become unkillable. If there are any wooded patches on the battlefield and Ruwt would be slain, he can instead take the place of any existing wooded patch, not even necessarily a friendly wooded patch, and restore half of his health rounding up. So he would respawn with 4 health, which would grant him 2 energy after the next replenish step, which is enough to spawn himself another fresh wooded patch. That wooded patch that he respawned within is then removed from the game. This ability is so cool for multiple reasons. First, just from a thematic and fluff perspective, it's awesome to imagine Ruwt being destroyed and then seeing this little spirit flitting out of the destroyed tree husk, finding a new host in a nearby wood, and then emerging again as if nothing had happened. Depending on your placement of wooded patches, This ability to effectively die and respawn on an existing wooded patch can allow Ruwt to pop back up in interesting places. You can do all kinds of things with this, like spawn Ruwt in the middle of a congested part of the board, lending further distraction to the enemy's melee there. You could even place a wooded patch earlier in the game nearby a distant moonstone, and then when Ruwt dies somewhere else in an active area of the board, have him respawn near that distant moonstone to harvest it and run off with it. As we'll see later, this ability to sort of die will have some wonderful synergies with another model in this box. Ruwt's final passive ability is called New Growth. With New Growth, Ruwt can elect to, once per turn, forego the energy cost of one of his abilities, and instead suffer 3 wounds to play that ability for no energy cost. This ability allows Ruwt to potentially cast his arcane ability Verdant Growth twice in a turn, to throw out 2 wooded patches early in the game. Setting up the battlefield with wooded patches is critically important for treefolk-centered lists, so potentially having 2 of 3 wooded patches out on the table during turn 1 is pretty huge. This New Growth ability has additional synergy with Ruwt and other models, since it allows Ruwt to be in control of his own mortality to an extent. If Ruwt is low on health and wants to relocate to another part of the table where there's an existing wooded patch, he can use New Growth to just kill himself and respawn somewhere else. Doing this will also trigger one of the on-death abilities of one of his fellow treefolk that we'll discuss momentarily. Now technically Ruwt is not killed, but instead reduced to 0 wounds, which is an important distinction for some abilities in the game. Since Ruwt respawns with 4 health and he has 2 energy at 4 health during the replenish step between turns, this means that next turn Ruwt could not only cast Verdant Growth to spawn 1 wooded patch, but he could use New Growth again to suffer 3 wounds and place another free wooded patch. So this helps ensure the battlefield is well stocked with wooded patches wherever your treefolk need them. Now moving on to Ruwt's only arcane ability, there's actually not too much to say about it. His arcane ability Verdant Growth costs 2 energy and requires any green card. If you successfully play or bluff this ability, you can drop a wooded patch within 3x inches and line of sight, with X representing the value of the card you played or bluffed. Now in Moonstone, within doesn't mean fully within, so as long as part of that wooded patch is within 3x inches, you can actually push it out a little further. Finally, looking at Ruwt's melee signature move, he can convert a rising attack into encroaching roots. This signature has the same damage profile as the normal rising attack, but it has the added end-step effect of snaring your opponent if they suffered any wounds from this attack, prohibiting them from taking a jog action for the rest of the turn. This is particularly useful if you're throwing Ruwt at an enemy Moonstone carrier who hasn't activated yet, or if you're just generally trying to make him annoying without the fear of him being destroyed. In summary, Ruwt is a fantastic support piece for treefolk heavy lists. He's a key enabler for certain bonuses and passives that the treefolk make use of, and Ruwt is the most efficient producer of wooded patches that Leshavult has access to. The only other source of wooded patches for Leshavult is Reagan, who can only cast Verdant Growth once per turn. Now it's always possible, albeit unlikely, that you could come up against a Commonwealth troop using Loki or a Dominion troop using Herbert Growbottom, and that they may be placing wooded patches of their own, but this isn't really something you could ever depend upon. Ruwt provides passive benefits to his fellow treefolk and creates the all-important wooded patches that amplify their strength on the table and also create line-of-sight blockers and area denial for your opponent. Ruwt's ability to be reduced to 0 wounds and not die allows for some crazy and interesting plays, and it synergizes well with other mechanics we'll discuss shortly. This all makes Ruwt a fantastic support piece for treefolk lists and a hard model to pass on bringing with you if you were already planning to bring the other 2 treefolk. Now we'll discuss the second of 3 treefolk, the dual-faction Leshavult Shades model, Snag. Unlike the diminutive Ruwt, Snag is a large, lumbering model. Like Ruwt, Snag has the treefolk and spirit keywords. He has 11 wounds and 3 energy, making him almost like a higher energy troll. As for base stats, he has a respectable 4 melee stat, a dangerous 2-inch melee range, a mediocre 3 arcane, and a giant +2 evade. The evade stat is likely due to both his tall stature and the fact that he's depicted as kind of a shambling, almost zombie-like tree who's definitely easier to hit than the more sprightly trees like Ruwt. As for passives, Snag has the ability to jog over wooded patches with the Woodfoot ability. So he benefits from having Ruwt along with him to create wooded patches to hide in and move through. With his Splintered Branches ability, Snag deals +1 impact or piercing melee damage. This, along with his respectable 4 melee stat, makes Snag an unexpectedly dangerous and versatile melee combatant who can bushwhack enemies from inside wooded patches. Snag's next 2 passives are his most unique. With Accursed, Snag gains a deterrent passive damage ability. Similar to the Look of Innocence passive ability on models such as Anya Bartal or Natty, and the Duchess's Foreboding passive ability, a Cursed makes opponents think twice before targeting Snag with an arcane ability. With this ability, when an opponent plays an arcane ability against you, you can reveal a green card from your resist hand before your opponent selects their card, and then their model will suffer X-1 wounds after that ability is resolved. So if you reveal a green 2, your opponent's model will suffer 1 wound. If you get the green 3, they suffer 2 wounds. Your opponent's model will suffer this damage whether they successfully resolve that action or not. This damage does come at the cost of broadcasting to your opponent that you have a green 2 or a green 3 in your resist hand, so they may decide not to try to bluff those cards, which denies you the ability to play a catastrophe against them. The deterrent effect of this ability is pretty strong though, especially when low health models like fairies are considering shooting Snag with several low energy abilities in a single turn. Those fairies could find themselves on the dirty end of that exchange, which they of course duly deserve. Snag's final passive ability is called Vengeance, and this is the one that synergizes so well with Ruwt's We Are Ruwt passive. With Vengeance, if a friendly character is slain or reduced to 0 wounds, the first time Snag casts an arcane ability this turn, he doesn't have to pay the energy cost. So if Ruwt uses New Growth to blow himself up, or if he simply throws himself into melee with the enemy and is reduced to 0 wounds, he can trigger Snag's Vengeance ability. Vengeance also works with the Revenant if you include him in your Ruwt lists, and he's reduced to 0 wounds. I really do like bringing the Revenant in my list with Treefolk, not only because of this synergy, but because I just find it cool to have extra kind of undead, shades-themed models running through my Ruwt Troupe Lists. Now, the arcane ability that Vengeance allows Snag to cast for free is Deadwood Curse. This ability costs 3 energy, which, based on Snag's energy placement in his health bar, could actually be a challenge for him to cast. He loses 1 energy at his second health pip, so if you throw him into melee, he's very likely to be reduced below the point where he can self-sufficiently cast Deadwood Curse. But this is where Ruwt comes in with his ability to destroy himself and sufficiently enrage Snag into casting Deadwood Curse for free. Alternatively, you could feed Snag extra energy, perhaps with Dranyer, who also comes in this troop box. The Deadwood Curse was the first ability of its kind, but it's now one that we've seen several times with other Shades characters. With this ability, which is commonly referred to as a curse, if Snag's player plays any green card at all, then they apply this curse to the enemy model. During the discard step, that model that has the curse, along with all models friendly to them within 3 inches, suffer 1 wound. The timing of this is pretty important, since the discard step comes before the replenish step. So this damage could knock energy pips off of the characters that it hits, preventing them from generating as much energy during the replenish step. Something worth noting at this point is that this curse can stack. So if your opponent mistakenly thinks you're bluffing, and you happen to have another green card in your hand, you could potentially get multiple instances of this curse on the same character, causing them and all their buddies to take 2 wounds during the discard step. Deadwood Curse has a pretty serious catastrophe effect, but one that could be possibly turned to your advantage. If a catastrophe is played on you, Snag suffers 2 wounds, and then all other models, friendly or enemy, within 3 inches suffer 2 wounds. It has come to pass in one of my games where I was playing Snag in a Shades troop full of fragile little 2-wound Psychopomps, and I think I had all of Nanny's Babelings out at once. And my opponent played a catastrophe on Snag, blowing up all of my surrounding Pomps and then seriously swinging the board presence back in his favor. Alternatively, though, you could throw Snag into the midst of the action, surrounded by enemy models, and then intentionally play a catastrophe card on him to blow up your opponent's models. If you have the Revenant or Azoria the Witch in your troop, you could remotely detonate Snag using Visions of the Future to deal this area of effect damage to your opponent's troop. Snag has pretty high health, so losing 2 wounds may not really matter too much to him. Now, the last thing to go over for Snag is his melee signature move. Like Ruwt, his signature converts on a rising attack. It becomes Hex and converts a rising attack into magical damage, doing 0 damage on High Guard, Falling Swing, and Thrust, while doing 1 damage on Sweeping Cut, Rising Attack, and Low Guard. Low Guard is typically the perfect counter to Rising Attack, but here you'll do 1 damage to a Low Guard. So if your opponent plays a Low Guard, the signature gives you the ability to damage them regardless. Now the end step effect of this signature should actually motivate you to prefer to deal 0 damage to your opponent. If you deal 0 damage after the attack, the signature applies the Deadwood Curse to your opponent. Now, just like other signatures, this end step effect can stack if you play a critical hit. So if you throw down 2 or even 3 rising attacks, you could stack a bunch of curses on your opponent. This could make going for it to draw extra melee cards definitely worth it for Snag. It's also worth noting that the signature move will do damage in some way or another. So no matter what your opponent plays, this hex will deal some kind of damage, be it one magical chip damage, or applying the curse. It's going to do something to them. And magical damage mitigation is the most rare type of mitigation in the game, so you're likely to get that damage through. In summary, Snag is a real beast, having a big chunk of health, a decent melee profile and defensive passive ability, and a bitterly cruel arcane ability and a signature melee move. In my Lushabolt games with Snag, I typically don't have any trouble triggering Vengeance from turn 2 onward to throw a free Deadwood curse out each turn. This should be even easier in Shades List, where you have lots of ways to fully control the mortality of your own models, especially your little Psychopomps. Even in situations where you don't have wooded patches, such as in Shades List, Snag is still a powerful model. He really only benefits from wooded patches to the extent that he can freely move through them, and so that he can use them as effective cover to compensate for his +2 evade stat. Without wooded patches, he's still a solid melee combatant and a wicked spellcaster. Now, the final Treefolk model of the 4 we're discussing in this video is the Goliath Gump. Gump stands at least a head taller than any other model in the game, and he's definitely an imposing physical presence on any table. Like the previous 2 characters, Gump has the Spirit and Treefolk keywords. Gump has a respectable health pool of 12, with 2 energy pips located in the second half of his health pool. This health and energy profile makes Gump appear comparable on paper to a lower health giant like Angerboda or a troll like Null. Compared to Snag even, he only has 1 additional health point, but 1 fewer energy. However, it's Gump's passives and other abilities that really help shore up his defensive profile. Stat-wise, Gump has a pretty average and uninspiring melee stat of 3, a nice 2+ melee range, a decent arcane stat of 4 for his 1 arcane ability, and a totally understandable evade stat of +2. Gump likes being in wooded patches, however, so if he can hide inside of one, he may be able to completely negate that +2 evade by way of cover provided by the wooded patches. All without negatively affecting what he's there to do. And again, with Ruwt's Wood Spirit passive ability, he can still cast his arcane ability through, from within a wooded patch without any adverse effect. Now, onto his passives. Gump has Woodfoot, just like Snag, to allow him to jog over wooded patches. Interesting, neither Snag nor Gump are slow, despite both of them being large, lumbering, animated trees. Perhaps this is because they have a wide stride that compensates for their cumbersome size and gait. Gump next has the passive ability Ponderous, which means he cannot take reaction steps. This means he's not going to be able to step in or step away from opponents looking to engage him in melee, and he won't be able to bank energy for reaction steps later in the turn. So when he activates, you may as well burn all of his energy then and there, because he can't use it otherwise. The only other way he can use his energy out of his own activation is to go for it when other models attack him. So if he hangs on to an energy or both energy and an enemy model attacks him, he can expend one of those energies during the melee to go for it to draw 2 additional melee cards, which may be something he wants to do. Next, Gump has Knotted Branches, which offers a meaty +2 impact damage in melee. He also has Bark Skin, which allows him to reduce by 1 any incoming piercing or slicing damage. Impact damage will still go through that without mitigation. So Gump can still get shot to pieces by pistols and cannonballs and pea shooters and any other kind of ranged impact damage, or any characters that are swinging big hammers at him or anything with impact damage. Those are still going to really hurt him. Gump's last passive ability is his most unique. So far, his passives have all been relatively standard modifiers to movement, offense, and defense. This last one, called Forest, lets Gump restore 1 wound for each wooded patch within 4 inches of him after he suffers damage. This can only happen once per turn, otherwise this would be an absolutely broken and bonkers ability. Gump, more than any other character among these 2 boxes, loves being ensconced in wooded patches. If he has all 3 wooded patches within 4 inches of him, he stands to heal 3 wounds once per turn after taking damage of any type. This kind of passive healing actually increases his effective health beyond the 12 listed on his card. You can be reasonably sure that he'll have at least 1 wooded patch near him for the whole game, and assuming he's going to start taking damage in at least turns 2 through 4, That's an additional effective health of 3, taking him to 15 health. Combining this ability with the fact that most Leshavult lists have a healer of some type or another, and you can begin to see how Gump has the potential to be a real defensive juggernaut. But we're not through yet discussing his defensive options, as we'll soon see when we get to his signature melee move. Before we get to that, however, let's look at his one arcane ability, Call of the Woods. This ability costs 2 energy, which is all the energy he has, and has an 8-inch range. With a green X, he can move the target enemy X plus 2 inches directly toward any friendly treefolk. And then the enemy suffers 1 wound for each wooded patch within 4 inches of it. This lure effect is quite a bit more complex than your average lure that typically just pulls someone a certain distance directly toward the caster. While this ability can pull the enemy directly toward Gump, it could instead pull them directly toward another of your treefolk. So you could use this ability if you're hoping to grab a Moonstone with Gump, but you want to pull an enemy Moonstone grabber further away from that Moonstone and toward one of your other treefolk. This lure also adds a damage component, which other lures generally don't. Other than, off the top of my head, I can think of Sonara's, the Merfolk, the Shades Merfolk. Her lure does damage. Candy Apples from the Leshavult Witch Antonia does. But most lures generally just kind of entice somebody directly toward the caster. The fact that this does more damage depending on how many wooded patches the enemy is near further reinforces the fact that Gump wants to be co-located with a whole grove of wooded patches. If he's around all 3 wooded patches, he could potentially lure someone into engagement, deal them 3 auto wounds, and then still be positioned to heal himself for 3 damage once per turn when he suffers damage. And it's important to note he can choose when to heal that damage, so it need not be the first time he takes some small amount of chip damage of 1 wound, like when an opponent would try to remove the protection ability from one of your characters. Gump can choose to time that heal based on when he takes a big hit or just really whenever he wants it. Now let's take a look at the catastrophe effect of Call of the Woods. When he quote-unquote suffers a catastrophe here, he is rooted in place and has his melee range extended to 3 inches for the rest of the turn. Wait, so he can't move or be moved, and he has a longer melee reach. So why is this bad? Well, in most cases, it actually isn't. This catastrophe is following the proud and insane Leshavult tradition of beneficial catastrophes. Here's another situation where you might want to have the Revenant or Zoria around just to trigger this catastrophe remotely at the right time. A 3-inch reach for such a defensive character as Gump is huge, especially when you start imagining him occupying a central position on the table, nestled between a bunch of centrally located moonstones, partially concealed within wooded patches, and making it impossible for enemy characters to harvest nearby moonstones without first destroying or shifting Gump. Now let's look at Gump's signature move, Rooted, which converts from low guard. It's a standard low guard, except that when you play it, you trigger the same effect that the Call of the Woods catastrophe grants. You're rooted in place, and you have your reach extended to 3 inches. This 3 inches also has the secondary effect of helping Gump to count as a melee distraction to enemies who may be attempting to engage one of your other nearby friendly characters, which will then reduce the number of melee cards those enemies can draw. The signature move, like the low guard it converts off of, also allows for a follow-up attack if your opponent plays a rising attack, which means you can conceivably hit them back with a free impact attack for +2 damage after resolving this first attack, since Gump adds +2 to his impact damage. This signature move also has an end step effect, which can be stacked as a critical if you have additional low guard cards to play. The effect heals Gump for 1 wound if he was not slain from this melee. So not only does Gump have passive mitigation from piercing and slicing damage, and passive healing when he suffers damage near wooded patches, but this signature also heals him for 1 wound and can be stacked with additional low guards for more healing. So if you're getting the impression that Gump can be an absolute pest to try to get rid of, you are definitely not missing a beat. I love directing Gump to march his way straight forward to the area of the map with the highest Moonstone concentration, and then just make an absolute menace of himself, concealing him partially in wooded patches so he can somewhat mitigate his +2 evade stat by hanging out in heavy cover, and then just covering multiple Moonstones with his 2-inch or 3-inch melee range, while shrugging off multiple attacks. Ideally, while your opponent pours resources into Gump and the Moonstone concentration that he's covering, your other characters are spiriting away other Moonstones and preparing to dive in to support Gump when needed. In summary, Gump is just an absolute powerhouse on the table. If you're running a Treefolk list, I there's no reason not to take Gump. He's just such an anchor to your Treefolk troops. He really benefits heavily from having wooded patches around him, though. So if you don't have some way of creating wooded patches, you're not going to get quite as much out of Gump. Without wooded patches, Gump is going to be much less of a he's going to have much less durability on the table. He's not going to be able to do any of his passive healing. Other than converting off of a signature move. And that +2 evade stat is really going to come back to bite him if he doesn't have wooded patches near him. But in any kind of Treefolk list or any list where you're maybe bringing Reagan to throw a wooded patch out and then just plop Gump in the middle of it, Gump is going to just do so much work for you. He's going to be so hard to shift, so hard to kill, and then he can just cover so much ground with that 3-inch reach. We'll now discuss the final model of these two boxes, Dranyer. Dranyer is the most dissimilar model to the rest of the group in that she isn't a Treefolk, but she has an incredibly useful arcane ability that can actually change that. I consider Dranyer to be the most difficult model of the bunch to use properly to her full potential. She appears to be a relatively simple and straightforward support character on first impression, but once you start considering the potential synergies with her abilities, you realize she can slot herself into nearly any Leshavult list and reap the benefits of just about any keyword synergies the faction has on offer. Dranyer is a trickster spirit, as is evidenced by her model's half-human, half-fox appearance. She appears to be in the process of transforming her appearance, and this is actually her most characteristic ability, as we'll discuss shortly. Dranyer has only one keyword, for now, which is Spirit. Her arcane abilities all benefit or harm models with whom she shares a keyword. And in the Leshavult faction at least, Spirit is a fairly common keyword, giving her immediate synergy with many Leshavult list types, including the Treefolk, who she's boxed with, who all bear the Spirit keyword. Dranyer has an average melee stat of 3, a short melee range of 1, a decent arcane stat of 4, and a respectable evade stat of -1, making her the hardest model to hit of all those we've discussed here today. She has a respectable health pool of 8, for being such a slight and sprightly little model, but only has an average energy total of 3. That energy total could change for the better, however, as we'll see in just a moment. Turning to Dranyer's passives, her first is the appropriately labeled Trickster ability, which gives her the chance to gain 3 energy once per turn upon successfully bluffing. The fact that one of her arcane abilities has a cost of 0 means that you'll always have a chance to bluff and gain 3 energy regardless of how little energy Dranyer was able to replenish between turns, or regardless of whether her energy was drained away from her before activating. Trickster is a double-edged sword, however, since if your opponent has some experience with the game, they may decide it's less costly for them to simply call your bluff all the time when you're playing as Dranyer, rather than risk missing your bluff and giving you 3 extra energy for her to cast another arcane ability, move farther away, or dig up a Moonstone. Dranyer's second passive ability is Shifter, which allows her to jog over wooded patches and water features. This is particularly useful when she's played alongside the Treefolk, as she'll be able to pop into and out of any of the wooded patches created by Ruwt. And Shifter is a slightly worse version of the Sure-Footed passive that we've seen on several other models in the game. Sure-Footed does what Shifter does, but also provides a discount to traverse actions. Moving on to the first of Dranyer's 2 arcane abilities, we'll discuss Mimic. Mimic costs 0 energy, so it can be played regardless of Dranyer's current energy level. At a 0 energy cost, it can understandably only be played once per turn. It provides 2 possible effects on either a green or a pink card of any value. On a green, it allows Dranyer to copy one of the keywords of another model within 8 inches of her. On a pink, it allows her or another model within 4 inches of her, who she shares a keyword with, to gain 1 energy. This simple ability is huge and foundational to Dranyer's personality and function in the troops she joins. Effectively and appropriately with her status as a trickster god, if she plays any green card for Mimic, she can become any type of model in the game and reap any of the synergies that come with that keyword. Does she want to become a Treefolk so she can benefit from the synergies of Gump and Ruwt's Wood Spirit ability? No problem. Does she want to join a troop of fawns and become a fawn to benefit from the synergies there and use her abilities to support them? Sure thing. Does she want to don a tinfoil hat and join a troop of crazy cultists and lend a hand to them? Done. This ability to become any type of model has so many cool synergies associated with it that it's hard to go into all of them in any depth and not turn this video into a 30-minute long treatise on Dranyer alone. I will say, though, that one of my favorite, at least theoretical uses for her is putting her in a troop with Jackalope Eric, Chubbs, and Gloom, and having Dranyer become an animal, supporting Jackalope and Eric with her own abilities, and being supported by Chubbs and Gloom with theirs. Perhaps we'll look at this and some other troop builds at the end of this video. The green effect of Mimic is of course amazing, but the pink effect is good too for times when you may not need to imitate another model's keyword that turn and just need to give yourself or another spirit 1 energy. More often though, I find the pink effect is a good one to use after you've had your bluff called on the green effect and you were in fact telling the truth. In this case, let's say you just imitated a friendly treefolk, and now you can immediately follow that up with the ability to toss an extra energy onto a friendly treefolk. The ability is normally only a once per turn, but that rule goes out the window if someone has unsuccessfully called your bluff. Then to add insult to injury, you might even successfully get away with bluffing the pink at this point, which allows you to trigger the Trickster passive and generate an additional 3 energy to Dranyer. Your opponent will probably be grinding his or her teeth at this point. Now let's move on to Dranyer's second and more meaty arcane ability, Cunning. Cunning costs 3 energy and can trigger 2 possible effects on a blue or pink X. Unlike Mimic, the value of the blue or pink card will have bearing on the impact of the ability's effect. On a blue, the ability heals X plus 1, but if the target shares a keyword with Dranyer, you can move the target X minus 1 inches. Healing X plus 1 makes Cunning a more expensive version of the standard healing ability, which costs 2 and also heals X plus 1. Where Cunning sets itself apart, though, is with the potential to move your model. If you play or bluff a blue 2 or blue 3, you can move your target 1 or 2 inches, respectively. This is potentially pretty huge to move a model out of a sticky situation, such as a dangerous engagement, or perhaps move them closer to an enemy. You can even set this up to mimic an enemy keyword and intentionally use this ability on an enemy model to strategically move them out of the way to allow one of your models to harvest a contentious Moonstone. Cunning's second ability is on a pink X and deals X magical damage to the target and then moves the target X inches if it shares a keyword with Dranyer. This is another ability that can be used either offensively or defensively depending on the situation. On a pink 2 or pink 3, this could do a significant amount of damage and disrupt the position and plan of the enemy model. And remember, if you successfully get away with bluffing at any point during your activation with Dranyer, you'll have enough energy to play Cunning twice. We should briefly note that the movement effects on Cunning are not optional. The wording requires you to move the models whether you like it or not. Now let's wrap up our discussion of Dranyer by looking at her signature move. Like many defensive signatures, this one converts from a low guard. It is called Duplicity and deals no damage to the enemy, but has some interesting effects. If there's a model within 4 inches that was not a part of this melee and shares a keyword with Dranyer, reduce damage suffered to null. Now, this is massive since you as the Dranyer player can set yourself up to reliably have another model with whom you share a keyword with nearby to facilitate this damage reduction. So even if you're a giant, or even if you have a giant completely like walloping on you, or you have Baron von Fancy Hat critting into some huge attack, those attacks will do absolutely nothing if you have another model with the same keyword nearby you. Now, as the end step of this signature, you must swap positions with a model within 4 inches that didn't participate in this melee, and it shares a keyword with Dranyer. I say must because it very clearly does not say you may swap positions. In the case of a Treefolk list, this might see Dranyer swapping places with Ruwt or Gump, putting her safely inside of a wooded patch while her opponent is now either staring at an almost unkillable Ruwt or a differently almost unkillable Gump. This can also interestingly be used to swap positions with your opponent's models if you've taken one of their keywords. So in the example of Baron von Fancy Hat, you may be able to have Dranyer take the human keyword and then swap places with Eric, who might be behind Baron. It's additionally worth noting that since end step effects stack, in the event you're playing multiple copies of Low Guard, you could resolve this switcheroo effect 2 or 3 times to hilariously hopscotch around the table with Dranyer. So in summary, Dranyer is, I consider her a very high skill ceiling character. You can use her to just kind of throw a heal around here and give extra energy here and there, but players who are more experienced and put a lot more thought into her use are going to just run absolute bonkers plays and run wild with her. She's a very good and solid support character who can easily adapt to between supporting her own troop and kind of messing with the opponent's troop. So she's very versatile. If you don't position her correctly, she can be kind of squishy since she needs to be near people she shares keywords with to kind of pull off some of her defensive tricks. But if you use her correctly, she could be an absolute menace in a different way than, you know, a character like Gump is a complete menace. But Dranyer is like a menace in a completely different and totally unique and hilarious way. So now we're going to transition into looking at 4 different possible troops that you can take that use all or some of the characters from these 2 troop boxes. Now, the first troop we're going to look at is just like a standard Treefolk troop, and this is I think this is the first troop I ran with the Treefolk when I started playing with them, and it's one I've still liked going back to. So it has all 4 of the characters from this box in it, and then it has Null, the Troll, and the Revenant. So the idea here is Null the Troll is just kind of another beefy character. He can be a kind of backstone Moonstone capper. He has a heal on him, so he has kind of a little bit more of a reliable heal. Also, you bring Null so you can do kind of some shenanigans with Dranyer. So one of the Dranyer mimic little fun tricks to pull is you have Dranyer mimic Null early in the game, so that Dranyer can become a troll. And then you have Null cast his Trollish Remedies ability on Dranyer to give her Tough as Old Boots for the rest of the game. And since Tough as Old Boots doesn't check to see if she's a troll every single turn, she'll keep Tough as Old Boots for the rest of the game, regardless of whether she switches back into being just a spirit or being something else. So you can make Dranyer a lot more durable, and you could cast multiple instances of Tough as Old Boots on her to make her like extremely give her a ton of passive healing. And then you put the Revenant in here as another kind of just annoying character to deal with. This list has a lot of annoying characters to deal with, but the Revenant is annoying because you can just kind of throw him upfield, and he can be very difficult to get rid of. And you know, he can trigger catastrophes. So in this video, I was talking about you may want to trigger some of your own catastrophes here. Like you may want to root Gump in place. You may want to detonate Snag. Null is also a great character to trigger catastrophes on, because Trollish Remedies will allow you to target an enemy character, have them suffer 2 wounds, and lose 1 energy. So you can just do that every single turn with Revenant if you wanted to. So Revenant is just very versatile for triggering catastrophes and then just being annoying to have to deal with. And you can't really even use, or the opponent can't really even rely on the trick of just wounding Revenant and taking him down to 1 or 2 health so that he can't really do anything, because then you could use your own characters like Dranyer to just kill him and make him revive with full health. Since she's a spirit and he's a spirit, she can use her cunning ability to make him suffer X magical damage and just kill him off and make him resurrect at full health. So this troop has a lot of tricks to play. It's pretty beefy, I would say. You've got Gump that's really tough. You've got Snag that's really tough. You have Null that's really tough. Revenant can't die. Ruwt can't die. Dranyer is probably the most fragile character here, but as I explained, you can kind of beef her up with Tough as Old Boots and just kind of surround her with all of these other really tough characters. So this one's a really fun one to play. It was one that I started with when I was learning how to play the Treefolk and Leshavolts, because it's a little bit more forgiving than some other lists you could put them in. Next, we're moving on to a Shades list. So this list only incorporates Snag from the Wyrdwood box, but Snag is just one of those characters that you really can't go wrong throwing him into a lot of different lists, especially Shades, because Shades love throwing curses out. And so Snag is here. Marley is in this list as a reanimator, and Marley also has a curse of his own to do additional wounds to enemy characters during the discard step. So between Snag and Marley, you can just do an obscene amount of damage to characters in the discard step. Banshee is also here just to kind of lean even further into that kind of curse damage, because she can do bleed effects during the discard step. We have Greymare here as a backup reanimator in case Marley gets destroyed. Greymare can also summon a Psychopomp and then can kill that Psychopomp remotely, which will then trigger Snag's Vengeance ability. Morag is here, who Morag can also do can do damage to a friendly unit, and that damage is just enough to kill a friendly Psychopomp. Morag, though, is just an amazing Moonstone carrier, so she can grab Moonstones and then just kind of like blink around like Nightcrawler from X-Men with Shadow Stride. She can also take big chunks of health off of enemy models with Hunting Ritual. And then similar to Snag, how Snag has a Cursed to reveal a green card from your resist hands, Morag has Eclipse, so you can reveal a green 2 or a pink 2 and then just have the enemy arcane ability do 0 damage to her. So she's a really useful character. And you have Joby here. Joby to pull Moonstone shenanigans and then have another reliable source of characters just dying. So Joby can kill himself all the time, and then Marley or Greymare can bring him back with his Reanimate Joby ability, bring him back for free. And then when Joby is destroyed, he triggers Snag's Vengeance ability. He triggers Morag's Reclaim Life ability to, instead of dealing damage to friendly units, to restore 2 wounds to friendly units. So there's just a lot of fun stuff going on in this list. There are a lot of different shades lists you could put together with Snag. This is just the first one that kind of popped to top of my head, but fun one to try out. Oh, and another note: more than half of the characters in this troop are dual faction. So you have Snag and Morag being the 2 dual faction Leshavult characters. Then you have Joby and Banshee, who are also dual faction with Dominion. There's only 2 pure Shades models in this list. Next, we have another Leshavult list. This is a witch troop, so it has all 3 of the witches: Antonia, Danica, and Zoria. It has Dranyer and Snag from the Wyrdwood box, and then it has the Revenant. So all the models in this troop are all spirits. So Dranyer immediately has synergy with all of them. So Dranyer doesn't really need to take any of their keywords. You can use Dranyer to take enemy keywords if there's a reason to do that, to kind of get away with some shenanigans with her cunning ability and with her duplicity signature move. The 3 witches are always just powerful together. It's they're pretty powerful with the various abilities they have. I won't go into detail on them here, but having all 3 of them makes them all more powerful. And then kind of for your front line, you have Snag and the Revenant. So the Revenant is an unkillable unit. Snag, we've gone into a lot of detail on him already, but in this list you have 2 characters that can remotely detonate catastrophe effects. You have Zoria and the Revenant. So between the 2 of them, you can be popping off catastrophe effects kind of left and right in this list. You can have Snag kind of doing his AoE explosion. You can have Zoria detonate the Revenant's Eternal Chill ability to heal the Revenant, and then deal 2, then heal another character. And there's just lots of fun little interactions here. This one's maybe a little bit more fragile because you have the 3 witches and Dranyer, who are not terribly durable, but you have you're kind of relying on Snag and the Revenant to be your frontline fighters, and but you have a couple of you have 2 or 3 sources of healing in this list, so you have that working for you. Also worth mentioning, the Revenant can set off Zoria's catastrophe for a violent impulse and give all the characters around her +1 melee damage for the turn, so you can kind of keep her near-ish to your front line and have the Revenant and Snag be swinging harder at things. And the final troop we'll go over is an animal troop. So this one's kind of near and dear to my heart because it's so far only exists in theory. I haven't put this one on the table yet, but it just seems very fun and kind of wacky. So the idea is you have 3 animals. You have Jackalope, the Beast, and Eric, who are then aided by Chubbs and Gloom, both of whom have animal-specific synergies. Gloom can move an animal 3 inches. He can do that twice per turn. Chubbs can give an animal 2 energy and restore a wound to them. And then you have Dranyer here, who can become an animal herself and then do extra heals and give extra energy and stuff to other animals. So just a bunch of animal synergies here. I just think it's kind of fun and cool, and the idea of Dranyer turning herself into a completely turning yourself into a fox or into a rabbit or something like that is just kind of cool. So this is one I haven't tried out really in practice yet, but I think it just looks cool, looks fun, and in Moonstone generally, if something looks like it's going to be fun, it's going to be fun one way or another on the table. So I think it's worth giving it a try. Well, I think that's enough time spent discussing these two boxes. As you can tell, I absolutely love these models. These two boxes were my gateway into the Ruwt faction, and I haven't looked back since. These four models work so well together as the foundation of a troop on their own, but they also offer the opportunity to build interesting troops by adding in a variety of other models into the mix. Thanks everyone for watching, and if you found the video helpful or entertaining, consider giving it a like and commenting, as it will help the visibility of the video. Until next time, this is Randall, signing off.